Welcome to Football Geeks podcast. My guest tonight is an author and Twitter curator of renown. His 2021 book, 71-72, Football's Greatest Season, charted the course of that enthralling year in English football, documenting the great managers, players and games of that iconic campaign. And it's a ground we'll be retreading today. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Dan Abrahams. Hello, Dan.
How you doing?
I'm very well, mate. Very well. So, we're going to go back in the DeLorean and we're going to explore that incredible season of 1971-72.
Yeah.
One of the, as I say, iconic seasons in Football League history.
Yeah.
But we won't give too much away for those who aren't kind of in the know about what happened in that particular year. We'll just talk about it and we'll let the story unfold.
Okay.
And as you're the expert on it, I'm going to allow you. But I'll allow you to do the talking, mate. And,
okay.
And I'll come in as infrequently as I possibly can. So, firstly, could you give me like a pre-season overview of the 71-72 season? What happened before that season? I mean, you know, the season before and leading into the season.
I mean, it probably best if it just sort of falls through, because I'll talk to you about sort of the players and the way the sort of thing was set up. But it's I mean, I was focusing particularly on that. There was a situation, you know, like leagues have been runners up and stuff like that. But it's I thought it best to sort of pick out some of the people that were around at the time and either in their last sort of hurrah or whatever that might be, to give it a sense of what was going on. I mean, and with the, you know, with the setups and what was available sort of thing. I mean, if that's all right with yourself, I mean, you know,
absolutely fine, mate. Absolutely fine.
Initially, and this was difficult to say because eventually his career went sideways in England in about 73, but I mean, one of the sort of the level of player you're talking about that was playing in this season and to all intents and purposes produced some of his best football for the opening sort of months of the season would be George Best. I mean, that team, the United team, was a little bit stale at the time, but you had Best, Law, you know, Charlton, and where they started off like a train really, and it was top of the table till the turn of the year, that sort of stuff. And it's just when the book was started, I was always struck that people only thought that, or a lot of people thought that football started with Sky Sports in 19 whatever it is, you know, and that sort of stuff. And of course it didn't. And this season was in many ways the last of the seasons that stopped the bigger clubs, you know, the Liverpool's, the Man United and whatever, who then ran riot for 10, 15 years or whatever else. This 71-72 was there was seventh in a row, different winner of the league, 10th winner in a row of the FA Cup, and there was a point between the teams. I mean, the league itself, Derby won by 58. You know, Leeds, Liverpool, Man City, and Arsenal were on 57. You've never had anything as close as that since or before, and then so you had a player like Best, you know, doing his stuff, and I always thought it was interesting that. To say to you is, if you can flip it round, people would say now, oh, well, the players aren't as fit, they weren't as good, the game's faster, technically, all this other stuff that they throw. But if you were to take Cristiano Ronaldo as an ex-Man United player and dump him back in the 60s, you've got football pitches. I mean, there's a saying, isn't it? In the 60s and 70s, there's a saying, if there's grass on the pitch, it's not the 1970s and it's not football. So you've got sort of mud pitches that are bogs, not the bowling greens that he's used to play on. Excuse me, so I've got the sort of low. And then if you have that, you've got no, there's no sports science. Sports science didn't exist at all. Sports science was an ex-player with a sponge who came on and rubbed your leg. You know, and then of course you had cortisone, which became the wonder drug of the thing, and they were pumping players left, right, and centre with this sort of stuff. I mean, notably, I think they say we shouldn't go near it at all now. And they say the human body could take, I think it's 3 cortisone injections in his life. Kevin Beattie was getting 3 a game, you know. So and it ruined his career. I mean, what a magnificent footballer he was. So you've got that sort of stuff going on, and then you've got injuries which nowadays would be 6 weeks out, maybe 6 months out. They were ruining players' careers. I mean, you had some players who were gone at the age of 20. I mean, one that springs to mind, Tony Green, finished 20 years old. And then you've got the sort of players, and I'm saying, if you think about the best players on his best football at this time, and it wasn't just hatchet men, which doesn't happen now at all. They had hatchet teams. I mean, Leeds United, everyone 1 to 11 would kick the living daylights out of you, for having the audacity to put your foot on the ball. Southampton, tough team. If I drop a referee, I'm sure people, if you see referees doing this, if a flair player fell on the floor, get up. There's nothing wrong with it. You'd be elbowed in the face and whatever. So it was about three issues, 3 tags where the referees would do anything. Then, of course, you put down the names of Ron Harris, you put down the names of Tommy Smith. I mean, them getting stuck into it, someone, holding onto the ball and trying to be flash. And yet, Best, Jimmy Johnson and players like that showed up for the ball, offered the ball all the time, got hammered, got kicked up. So you got him playing is absolute, it's in many cases, it's best football. And then some of the other talent that was knocking about, I mean, goalkeeper-wise, you had Jennings, you got Clements, Shilton in the second division, Banksy was still around. In the second division, you've got sort of, the Sunderland goalkeeper, his name's eluded me, Jim Montgomery, one of the most famous double saves. He was at Sunderland. I mean, in that period of time while they were falling apart, Best was playing against people like this, and everyone was within a chance of winning something. If you know what I mean, everyone had great players and a potential, which I'll go back to. But so from that period of time, sort of August to September, you've got a player like that playing his best, and the build up to it against those great teams, and then they just fell apart. And in the same time, which is funny, we sort of mentioned I mentioned when his career finished, which had been 73-ish, when I think he first retired, about 21 years old or whatever it was, that he's played his final game against my team, QPR at Loftus Road, and another young man who came along, a Maverick Stamboul, scored a brace in that game. So that was like the passing of the torch. But specifically in our season, 71-72, Kevin Keegan started kicking on in January 1972, and Best had gone. So you've got this sort of players coming in, and you had that the Liverpool team that Shanks had not rebuilt quickly enough, but then stormed on and went on from there. So although there was the sort of, I mean, Arsenal won, there was a double and so on with the team before, but you still had your Leeds, you still had these sides that were there and thereabouts, all powerful, strong sides who could produce and perform anywhere. Sort of thing. So the setting, I mean, even in the second division, you've got people like Rodney Marshall, Don Rogers, Tony Green, all great players. Third division, Don Masson, Bruce Rioch, all great players. Again, that was the setting, that was the arena for it, and these teams could all produce something or go up or whatever. And if teams come up from the second division into the first, they had a chance at doing something. Nowadays, that doesn't exist. You come up, you hang on if you're lucky enough. If not, you go back down and you take your £35 million and get on with it or whatever it is. So there was a setting from there of what was going on with the teams and teams in, maybe you consider to be in flux. But Liverpool, for example, went on a massive run from the January, and they basically dominated for the next 20 years. Won the European Cup 5 years afterwards with that team from there. I think they dropped 1 point in 14 games from the January and missed the league by a point. So that was the sort of setup and the teams you had.
It's funny you should say. I mean, the team like Leeds. I mean, they had like a midfield troika: Johnny Giles, Peter Lorimer, Billy Bremner, all supremely gifted footballers who could put their foot on the ball, but could also fly into a tackle as well.
Yeah, they weren't frightened.
Yeah, and even like Arsenal, we had Ray Kennedy, who was a sublime footballer, but again, he wasn't scared of throwing himself in front of the player. That's a great intro. That's fantastic. So let's move back a little bit, because we're looking at the 71-72 season, how it unfolded. Now, I think it's important that we talk about a certain maverick manager who, at the time of the start of that season, was 37 years old. He joined Derby County in 1967 from Hartlepool. Would you like to take the story on
Well,
from
I mean,
their form
I'd
that
only
we put
go
them
from
back.
from that point
Yeah,
where they are. I mean, they'd finished ninth the season before, and I think it's very interesting how you could have the variation of the managers. I mean, Cloughie was king in many ways, and still now in what did he say? I'm not saying I'm the best, but I'm in the top one or whatever it is. I mean, but that he wasn't really the tactical side of things. I don't think him and Taylor were, and you can't have one without the other. It wasn't sort of much that they were the tacticians. They got teams to work. They knew how to put players together, and they'd pick out players, sort of John McGoverns and stuff, who could break up play, and then keep it simple. Give it to the players who could, as easy, give it to him. He knows how to play football. Give it to the fat, whatever it might be. I mean, at Derby, that team they had there. The back two, so he had Todd and McFarland at the back, and you've got Hector, brilliant player, winger Hinton, Archie Gemmell, and they were people sort of in many ways say they were lucky, but they weren't. They just kept solidly picking up wins all the time. I mean, I'll talk about it a bit later. But there's an interesting point in it where Leeds in the turn of the year were hammering everyone for a period of time. I mean, it's a 7-0 Southampton win and stuff, which I'll mention it a bit later as well. But Derby got as many points as Leeds did in that period of time. And everyone said Leeds are going to win the whole league. But Derby just kept going about their business, And it might not have been as glamorous, but it was 2 points in the bag. So, I mean, they could afford to lose their last game of the season to City and still win the league. That doesn't happen nowadays. It doesn't happen now. Very rarely happen. So but he still had that thing, kept them going, kept them motoring along. That massive confidence that he had. And it's strange interesting about him was that the book itself had a lot of things that kept coming up and kept rolling round, and it's that 50 years, of course, because Derby were in a terrible state when the book came out, and it was awful. You're watching it and you're thinking, this they'd go to the wall here. They could be finished. Derby could be gone. And as much as it was a nice sort of selling point for 50 years and 50 years, it wasn't. It was awful to watch. I sort of ended up becoming a bit of a Derby fan in the end, sort of desperate for them not to collapse, but it also was nice for people to have the respite to, when they got the book, or people coming up on Twitter or saying, that was the time. It was fantastic. But Cloughie, he knew what he was doing, and he really got into his stride after that as well. And this was the time that it, put the base down of what he was going to do. So it was interesting. There's an interesting sort of concept with when the late great John Motson, I'll try and speak about later, but who was doing the forward and chatting away about things. And he said, of course, they had to ring Derby, who were around their team holiday, to tell them, to talk to them about winning the title. And he's sort of always, I won't do a Clough impersonation, but So I thought you'd call us up, and now we've won the league, this sort of stuff. It's a fabulous character and a fabulous sort of way of going about it all. But I don't think you can really have one without the other, without him and him and Taylor, if you know what I mean, in a way. But
no.
I mean, and when you look at that they. I can't see them having outside that era. I mean, going to the 80s, can you imagine them managing with agents and that now? It just they wouldn't put up with any of that nonsense.
They were notoriously kind of weary of agents and any players who were. I mean, there was a great one with what was it? The Larry Lloyd came into the club.
Oh right, yeah.
And he, I can't remember what he said. Something about him. About the team not gel. I don't think this gels with me, and he was just like gelling. What are you talking? Typical sardonic kind of Clough response to anything that was a little bit kind of affected. He was a kind of a straight talking guy who appreciated the same back, I would imagine. And he found his real footballing life partner in Peter Taylor, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
They were a team. Clough was the man manager, but Peter could spot a player.
Yeah. I remember that. They're telling me about fabulous. This would have been a bit later when he was at Forest, but they in the League Cup, I think it was the semi-final, and when the guy who was on the defence scored the goal, ran up the pitch and scored. And I said, for God's sake, don't go up there, and he scored. And he said he got them all round the ball, the players, and he put his hand on the ball. Came in about a minute to go before the kick-off. Put his hand on the ball and he said, if you love this as much as it loves you, you'll beat this lot today. And that was it.
Yeah.
And they beat Liverpool. So.
That's it. And it was a season where, I mean, the lead changed considerably throughout the course of the season.
Yes.
I mean, at the start of the season, there was the season before Manchester City. They were, I think they finished something like 11th.
Yeah.
And they had their own kind of trio of fantastic kind of footballers. Like, there was Francis Lee, and there was Mike Summerby and Colin Bell. And the season started poorly, didn't they? They were under Joe Mercer at the start of the season. And they weren't doing particularly well. And then another flamboyant manager came along, didn't he? Another great kind of character of football. Yeah.
Well, that I mean, in their way, they as you say, they slumped off. Yeah, it was 11th the previous season before, but they definitely gone off and were looking to be almost a mid-table team. But if they could have stayed free of injuries, they could produce the goods. I think the real issue there was, and people like to talk about it as the Rodney Marsh effect and everything else, but the two managers were split. They were at war with each other, and Allison wanted Marsh, and Mercer didn't want Marsh, and there was a schism there that was never going to be healed. And there's some interesting sort of facts about that. I looked at in the book and dug out, and it's sort of, I mean, they picked up the mantle after sort of United started slipping. But if you look at the point with Rodney Marsh, who seems to want to say I cost Man City the title, strange chap, but there you go. I mean, when he played started 7 games with sub in 1. I remember sort of look at some stats. He scored twice in a win over West Ham, came on at Old Trafford, won a free kick, and scored a second goal. So he got them those. In that period of time, Joe Corrigan was out injured for 7 games, and Man City lost 3 of those. So that's a massive impact. And they got hammered at Anfield and dropped points against Sheffield United and had a 2-goal lead there, where you couldn't lose drop points. And so I think they were gone before. I think they were gone before Rodney turned up. I know they had to adjust their play, such as like Arsenal did with the ball, and that ruined them as well. But I think they were well gone before then. And I mean, even to get they beat Derby last game, and Rodney scored in that as well. So, but there was definitely, I think they were just on the way out, sort of thing. I don't think they were. It was there. Do you know what I mean? Beforehand, and 68 to win the league, 68, I think it's quite a time away from being the team that you are and to what you become, sort of thing. So, but there were a lot of those sides. I mean, I sort of go through them a bit. Is it in that period you got the? I mean, Arsenal. It was all London the season before that, wasn't it? The cup, the double, and the League Cup, the all London team.
Yeah, Tottenham.
Arsenal had stayed fit. Yeah, Arsenal had stayed fit for that whole season. And then had Charlie Jules sort of injured, and a bit bad luck with that. But really, they kept most of their players fit, and they were all on the right side of 30 odd years old and whatever. Bob Wilson, all those sort of. But only Frank McClintock was the elder sort of statesman. And then he still went on with my team and nearly won the league in 1976, and he was 32 at the time in 71, 72. So he had an engine on him. Do you know what I mean? So I mean, they were there with their best. So they got hit by Don Howe going to West Brom just before the season started. And I've made a little note that there's something that is quite interesting. That the West Brom manager, now everything's Twitter and everybody knows about everything. I mean, the terribly sad loss of Trevor Francis today. He went on to be part of the English youth team that won the European Youth Trophy at the end of the season. Again with Kevin Beattie, who we mentioned a bit earlier, and Phil Thompson from Liverpool. So, but the manager at West Brom at the time, Alan Ashman, was told by a waiter in a restaurant when he was on holiday that he'd been sacked, and that got the West Brom job. Which nowadays that wouldn't happen. He'd know, his phone would be buzzing and he'd know straight away, sort of thing, and he'd probably be on Sky moaning about getting the sack, sort of thing. You know. So,
I bet the waiter didn't get a tip that evening.
I bet
mate.
he didn't. No, I bet he didn't. Yeah. He ruined my dinner. I mean, in those things, you've got it's going to be team-wise. I mean, Leeds, the all-powerful Leeds. I mean, again, the thing that could, they were viable for everything on four fronts. Runners up for the last two seasons, and they started because of the trouble caused in the West Brom game. They lost. They say they lost the league for the season before. They played 4 matches away from Ellen Road that season. So even though you've got a strong team, the only players who are older are Jack Charlton and above 30, Jack Charlton and Johnny Giles. And they play some beautiful football. Everyone says they lost it because of the playing the opening 4 matches away from Ellen Road. But they lost to Southampton, they lost to Huddersfield, and they lost to Coventry. 1 point out of any of those matches. We were all struggling. 1 point out of any of those matches, they've won the title. So that could be the issue. And I looked at those sort of, they're discussed in the book sort of thing. And then you've got 3 possible others. 2, the perpetual Spurs, would they do anything? Who knows? Are they a cup team? But they had some good players. Jennings, Chivers still up there. Peters, Gilsey, Mullery. I mean, that could be. They could do it. And Wolves, who had European football for the first time in a decade, were another team who could potentially be there. Or would the European football be too much for them? And would they look a lot of teams? It take them out of the frame. So then along with Liverpool, United, Jock Stein had gone there and then said, "I don't want to go there." So they were all in a bit of chaos. I think they bought 3 players in 7 years, so it was all a little bit stale. And no one, I think, presumed that they would do anything, but they went off like a train. I mean, it was theirs to lose, really. And then, again, the Liverpool team started badly, but then ended in style and dominated football for the next 15 or 20 years. So, so from that, then City went sort of the top of it or whatever, and looked good. And Everton, again, another team who you could say should have done better, but had struggled since 1970. And then the Alan Ball, this, that, and the other, and the breaking up of the Holy Trinity decimated 2 teams really, because the heart fell out of the Everton side, and he went to an Arsenal team that adjusted a winning style and stopped winning.
It's odd because like Arsenal, I mean, they finished 5th, and they were I think they were 5 or 6 points off the top. So they, in theory, it was a pretty decent defense of the title, but it just wasn't. They weren't as relentless as some of the other teams around them were. They had good players. They still, Charlie George was in there, and Ray Kennedy, as I still kind of said. But they just fell a little bit short that season.
Yeah.
But also you had great players. Peter Osgood at Chelsea. They were, they were outside bets for the title that year. But
with a bit of luck, and they dropped down slightly with Hudson with an ankle injury, and became a slightly lesser player than he was. But I mean, a brilliant midfielder. They could, and on their day, they could turn anyone over. So if you think that to start off that season, 6 to 8 teams all within a decent shout, and then Sheffield United kicked the door open and stormed off to be, the sort of the team. At the start of the season, everyone thought, "Oh right, hang on, what's going on here?"
They're top of the league, weren't they?
With and newly promoted with Tony Curry. I mean, they beat Leeds, Everton, and Arsenal.
So moving through some of them great games of that season. Let's move to. I mean, because the tail end of the season was a convoluted kind of affair, wasn't it? There was lots of oddities that made the destiny of the title a real kind of thrilling climax, wasn't there? Because the week before Leeds and Liverpool concluded their season, Derby played their final game, didn't they? Do you want us to run us through that final week of the season?
Well, I to be honest, I've sort of focused on other bits. So my I don't know if you've got notes there.
I think it started on the 1st of May. Derby were at home to Liverpool.
Right.
And Liverpool were in kind of pole position at that point. And John McGovern scored the winner, which put Derby on 58 points. But Liverpool were on 56, I think, with one game left. But if they won by a certain amount of goals, they could take the title too.
Yeah.
And their final game of the season was at Highbury against Arsenal. And then we had Leeds were going into their final game of the season, like you said earlier, needing just 1 point.
Yeah.
And they were playing Wolves at Monaco.
Yeah, that's right. This is now within. Was it 48 hours of the FA Cup final?
That's right. Yeah, 48 hours prior to the FA Cup final, Leeds were in a face-off for the title as well. With the double, a very real possibility.
Absolutely,
another back-to-back double, very possible.
Yeah.
But it wasn't to be, was it, Dan?
No, it wasn't, and it. I know that the sort of with Leeds, it was winning that FA Cup, the Centenary Cup, and all that was the big, it was a sort of a match. But that, I mean, and that was a murderous opening to a cup final as well. But it wasn't right. So it was the things that I looked at within the book and was the little bits that there's so many possibles. It was this, it was that, it was this. Rodney Marsh, whatever, Leeds, and whatever else. I mean that in that. I've just got to note down here, in that period of time that Leeds, February to March, Leeds beat Man United 5-1, Forest 6-1, Arsenal 3-0, and Southampton 7-0. And still didn't kick on to they were top once in January for 1 week, Leeds, for the whole of the season. So it was a really intriguing sort of time and just to start with people, but Derby would never have been considered a favourite, really, at any point. They would just be a possible, and they had the Clough side of it, and they were a good team. But you wouldn't. I don't think you'd put a tenner on, unless you're a Derby fan. I don't think you'd put a tenner on the beginning of the season and said we're going to win the league. How Big Ed must have been confident about it, because he just knew somehow. He just kept steering through, didn't they?
I think him just saying it, even if he didn't believe it, nurtured belief in his players. And as you said, he did have a great group. I mean, like Alan Hinton on his day, his beguiling best was a great attacking winger. He was, and I think early in the season they played Man City at the baseball ground, beat them 3-1, and Hinton was on song, and I think that's when people really took Derby seriously.
I think they took him seriously. Yeah, they think so, but just over the whole sort of 42 games, would you? Definitely not at the start. But then, they just kept picking up, and it did seem that the teams, the whatever you want to call them, the bigger teams, pushed up then dropped off, and just couldn't seem to keep it together. And maybe that was it. Maybe it's the marathon, not sprint thing. Derby kept 1 foot in front of the other.
I think that it is you had a number of really good sides who were almost qualitatively equal in that journey. And whereas now that and sadly it doesn't seem to be the case in the modern game. There's evidently a hierarchy. That's a smaller portion of teams are in that hierarchy.
I think so. It's very sad and sad that these. I mean, if you look at things at the moments of this, I mean, there's the famous George Best goal, which almost sort of encapsulates an era at Sheffield United. He's running along with the angle and scoops the ball in the net. That's been shown, time immemorial. But people somehow sort of don't seem to think that it's. I don't know. Maybe now it's not. So I was desperate to show this and show how good this was and how good the season was and how good so many teams were, at the time. So it's there was tons of great football, as you say, and everybody had great players all the way down. Everybody had great players, and players of flair and great strikers or whatever it might be. They had, and so it was it's just brilliant football all round. But I said, just as you say, they were all the big guns were relatively even. It just needed something to and they slipped up with it. And 2 games in 48 hours to try and win the league and a league and cup double.
It's funny that we talk about like about the flair of players because yeah, like you say, throughout the league there were teams with flair players, but we as a nation seemed scared of flair, didn't we? Around that time, as we were you know, that classic kind of number 10 was evolving within the English kind of game. For the national team, it was more based on solidity, wasn't it? It was a kind of bit of a ridiculous kind of paradox of the way that the league game, the league football was going.
Yeah, I mean, even when and there's a difference in that. I mean, people like Johnny Giles. Johnny Giles was a great flair player, but he was a tough and dished it out. And Leeds, but Leeds, I mean, some of the football in that 7-0 beating of the poor drunk and punch drunk Southampton team. But it's amazing stuff. So all these players could play, and yet. Some of them could dish it out, but even the ones with the flair could still handle it. Georgie Best, Jimmy Johnson could still take and keep going, you know. So it was, but yeah, you're right. Internationally, the managers seem petrified of it, so, which is well, very strange. You know. And with this season, so many clubs had players who were good. Everybody had somebody. And it's all the way through the leagues. There were players each club seems to have something. And for teams that had just come up or a couple of years before come up or whatever else, to be able to, they weren't going out spending £350 million and just, you know, or sticking the bus in front of the goal or whatever the term is. They had a chance. A lot of these teams had a chance, but it then after 71, 72, it then became Liverpool and then after that it was Man United and as this was everybody, you know, is in with a chance sort of thing, you know. So, and that was when, you know, the European Cup, that was a one-team shot. It wasn't the Champions League teams first to sixth could possibly get in, you know. So.
Yeah, that's a bit of a travesty, isn't it? I always I was speaking to like another Stephen Scragg the other week, and he was talking about like how it was the champion. It was one team. You know, 32 teams over 2 games, and it was a real kind of, if you weren't on song one day, you could find yourself dumped out, and it happened all the time.
Absolutely,
yeah.
I mean, in that, you look at that sort of, you go through the leagues. Aston Villa in 71, 72 were in the 3rd division. 10 years later, they won the European Cup.
Yeah.
You know, so that was how good they were then. Weren't moving up. That was a unit that had some sort of good youth policy and so on and so forth. Yeah. So it was there were teams had that, but to get to that, and the UEFA Cup. I mean, the UEFA Cup was an amazing competition. It's almost full international teams in some sides. You know, playing 1 to 11, and they're facing whoever's come up second in the 1st division. So.
And that was a good qualitative guide. The UEFA Cup of the 71-72 season was a good guide to how good that league was, because two of our teams reached the final of the inaugural. I say, you know, it was the UEFA Cup, but it was the Fairs Cup.
Yeah, it was the Fairs Cup.
Yeah. But in the inaugural UEFA Cup of 71-72, we had an all English final, didn't we?
Yeah. So we Tottenham and Wolves. Yeah. And that. Yeah, you think? I mean, in a way, that was very sad for that one of those 2 teams. That would be Wolves, because you want to sort of, you know. But it's that was a quality cup competition, not something you get knocked out of and thrown back into because they want to keep you in Europe. You know, they were proper sides, and that's that. I mean, I know we're sort of referring to QPR. I mean, they played Cologne team that had all sorts of vast amount of international. Spartak Prague had half the international team from Czech, whatever. And you think these are like quality players, and then England are playing them 6 weeks later in a thing, and that was like that all the way through. You know, that was kicking off in that season. So you know.
Yeah, I think somebody said the UEFA Cup was harder to win than the European Cup. I think that's probably why.
Yeah,
because the sheer depth of quality that we had, and evidently that season it it showed, didn't it? It showed.
Yeah, yeah,
So going to integrate games, and this is going to form a link to the next bit. Like one of the great iconic games of that season was, of course, the Hereford United versus Newcastle FA Cup game.
Yeah.
And it had particular bearing for you because there was a young commentator who was cutting his teeth at the BBC, and it was that particular game and one particular goal that kind of made him a household name virtually immediately. Would you like to go into that for me, then?
Yeah, well, I mean, the game was Hereford. It was it'd been postponed, I think it was, and John had been given, John Watson, who my dad, Bob Abrams, was the longest producer director of Match of the Day. Sadly now no longer with us, as is John. Sadly, John Watson. My dad gave him his first picked him up from the Barnet Evening Press, I think it was, and said, "I want to get you come in. I've read your copy, and I think you're good enough," and got him involved with Match of the Day. But yeah, Motti was. No one wanted to go to the Newcastle game because it was just it'd be a match that just passed through and nothing. Newcastle would win, and that would be the end of that sort of thing. And he went along and he drove Ricky George up to the game. Ricky George scored the winner. So that shows you how these things are nowadays. You know, a commentator of the game picked one of the players up and take him up there. And then, of course, the Radford strike, and his dad just passed away recently. But the Radford, that was an equaliser. No one seems to remember that. Everyone seems to think that was the winning goal.
It's a winner, don't they? Everyone thought it was a winning goal.
Yeah. So that was an equaliser. Something that's interesting about that game, and they then went on to lose. They ran West Ham close. They went on to lose to West Ham. But was David Icke would have been in goal for Newcastle. He's not been injured. It's always worth dropping in there as an interesting point, because he then went on to be, you know, David Icke, whatever it was, and whatever happened with him. So there were really, really amazing little quirks about it. But the lovely bit with if you'll indulge me for a minute, the lovely bit with John and John Watson, he was a very close family friend. It was a very sad time to have lost him, but was I was able to contact him and say, would he do the foreword with the book? And it was sort of a completion of a circle, really, because my dad had started John in television and sport, and then he did the foreword for me with for the book, which, you know, and that was the last one of the last pieces of things that he was involved in. So it was very prosaic that would happen. But he's a wonderful man, and it was wonderful to get involved in that. And the game itself, I remember him saying to me, he then after the match he went back to the managers, and the managers. House, and they were just sitting drinking all night and singing American Pie was like the number one in the charts. So just on the loop, take the 7-inch, put it on again, and do that, you know, sort of stuff. So yeah, but if you can imagine him driving, I can't imagine a team now driving one of the centre forwards up in a car. The commentator from Sky Sports or whatever it would be, dropping off Haaland and saying, "Oh yeah," before the game, and you know, that sort of thing. So there's real beauty and romance there with that.
So your dad had a great working relationship with John.
Oh, they were absolute best friends. Yeah. And with a lot of them, he worked with Jimmy Hill, Terry Venables, that sort of stuff, those sort of people. And Motti ended up performed the eulogy at my dad's funeral. Yeah, because my dad asked before he passed away, could we get John to do it? And he was there. Not a man who went to funerals, John. He didn't like that sort of stuff because it was something that wasn't for him, but he made a point of getting to my dad's and doing it because they were such great friends. Yeah. He's a wonderful man. He's a really wonderful man. Yeah. So it was a lovely way of hitting it, and just the joy in his voice talking about that game, because that was the start of his career, really. And it was just no one wanted to send John. So off John went, and it became a household name and the voice of football for the next 40 odd years or whatever it be. So,
and it started in 1971-72, mate. Which is fantastic, fantastic. Yeah. So, just as to wind it up in a bit, what have you got any? Is anything on the cards for the near future, Dan? Are you involved in any?
I'm sort of been mulling over an idea with the football book, but I've just doing sort of self-published fiction things at the moment and stuff, and I've been. An intense period of time getting the book over the line. I then it was the piece of COVID and all the rest of it was going on. I then decided to launch a little clothing company. So I started up a little clothing line, Lucky Dollar Clothing, which I'm doing now, and that takes up a lot of my time. So I didn't make it easy for myself. When no one could get outside, I was running around doing all sorts of mad things. So I'm doing that at the moment. But I have some ideas for another football book, but it's there's such a lot goes into it. It's such a lot of effort and such a lot of time and stuff like that. And I don't know if I would ever find something like this again.
It's true. I think they say that every person has one book in them, and some people only have one book in them, and that's the way it is. As long as
I had a couple out. I had a rugby league book out, which is an interesting book to do with the getting rugby league into the RAF, because it was banned from being played in it and stuff. But just the things that happened in and then later on, say Derby 50 years, we were going into the EU when in 71, 72, Brexit when the book was released. All this, it was a really strange, like some sort of black hole. It just seemed to. I kept checking, are these stories real? Can this be true? Oh, it is true. And then it just got weirder and weirder and weirder in this wonderful world that was going on during this season. So.
All the parallels and paradoxes came back and revisited basically.
Yeah.
So there are still copies of the book available. Where can people who wish to get their hands on a copy of this fantastic book get it, Dan?
It's still available on Amazon and Pitch Publishing. Was pitchpublishing.com. They'll be able to help with any copies. And as far as I know, it's still in WH Smith's as well. It's around. It can be ordered, but I think it's still maybe on the shelves in there. But it's still selling well. It's been it's number one on Amazon sports books and sports history books or something. So, and it's still in the top sort of 10 or 20. So it's been out 2 years. So it's wonderful that people still feel that. I mean, someone sent me a message on Facebook the other day saying it's the best researched football book I've ever read. I'm absolutely taken aback by that. So there's still people still like it and think it's a great book, which is lovely, really. And it is honestly, Phil, it was the greatest season of football ever. There's no question about it. Read the book. If you read the book, they'll agree. It really was.
Fabulous, mate. Well, thank you for speaking to us today, Dan.
No,
so
thanks for having me.
Get out there, buy a copy of the book. It's fabulous. Okay, and we'll see you next week on Football Geeks for more fantastic football guests. See you next time.